Let's start with a very interesting Reddit story from Infinite Respect. 4757. Revenge is dish served very, 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 very cold. In my young 20s, I moved to a new city to try start my career and life. Money was very tight, but I was confident I would get things up and running. In my job search, I came across a promising opportunity at a small firm, the firm. Instead of offering me the job, the owner, said he would like me to come in for 2 days and work. If it was fit, they would hire me, and if not, they would pay for the 2 days. Money was so tight at the time that I figured taking the bus to and from the job was a luxury I could not afford, and walked an hour each way to get there. Money was very tight. I did good work both the days and worked very hard, but it was not a fit. The owner then tells me, I know we said we would pay you, but it's just too complicated to set you up for just 2 days, so you will just have to be happy you got the experience with us. The way he acted really rubbed me the wrong way. I was mad as I really needed the money, but as I was trying to find a job and I figured it was not in my best interest to make waves as word may get around, I was difficult. I did, however, decide that someday, some way I would get my revenge on the owner. I did find a good job that led to great career, but I always kept tabs on the owner, looking for the time and place to get some revenge, and even a few times considered some more juvenile methods. Just short of 20 years passed, and now I was very senior in my chosen professional, but instead of working for a small firm, I was a leader in a very large national company that hired firms. As it turns out, we had a large contract come up that I was the lead executive on the procurement team in the area the firm operated in. Things have changed a bit over the years, but bidding on these contracts was at the firm's expense at the time back in the early 2000s. However, to safeguard them from wasting too much money, the bidding would be in stages. Well, sure enough, the owner and his firm put in an exploratory bid. They were not perfect for the job, but they could actually do it, so I assisted in them moving to the next stage, and the next stage, and then the final stage. The easiest thing I could have done was shut them down right away and got a bit of revenge. But they were qualified, so I did not do that. There was some risk to letting them go through to the end, though. Though I was the lead, it was a team decision. And to be honest, if they had the best proposal, despite my thirst for revenge, I would vote for them. The proposals and presentation came in, and luckily the other firm was a bit better, and we went with them. Normally, the executive lead didn't deliver the bad news in the bid process, but I volunteered to take on the call, and that was my little dose of revenge. It was fun to call the owner, who had no idea we met 20 years ago, and tell him, we were impressed with your proposal, but it is just not the right fit. I know you must be disappointed to not get the contract, but at least you got great exposure to our process. I know I should have used his own words from 20 years ago, but I could not bring myself to do it. The firm must have done about 200 hours of work on their proposal, so I figured that was payback for my 16 hours with 20 years of interest. The revenge was a masterfully executed, and of course, OP played long. After 20 years, OP delivered the perfect blow by wasting the owner's time and effort. It was perfectly executed, subtle, and satisfying. The next story is from Felipe Meyer. I thought I was done with my revenge, till my former boss gave me a second chance years later. This happened a few years back, and recently the whole ordeal just gained some new ramifications, so be advised. It's a long tale. Part 1. Where I caused my old boss to lose a bunch load of money due to software piracy. A little context. I'm a teacher with a degree in advertising and have been involved with IT for the past 20-something years, although I've found my love for teaching just some 10 years ago. I passed through a lot of schools in the meantime, from the big ones to the smallest ones, and accumulated a bunch of experience both in the classroom and behind the scenes, designing workbooks, video courses, learning platforms and such. So I started thinking it was past the time to migrate to a management position. The opportunity came in a prestigious school of digital art, and I became its teaching manager, overseeing all the teachers and the intern learning routines. It was a hard but honest job, for a time. Soon it became obvious that my boss was not exactly what he tried to present to students and employees. He would display bursts of anger and antagonize the team, demanding impossible results and asking about tasks that he never assigned, but somehow was our job to guess. One time, during a meeting, he grabbed a big chair and pretended to throw it across the room. It was his idea of a joke. Nobody even flinched because nobody doubted for a second he was capable of actually doing the deed. Needless to say, nobody laughed as well. In my country, employers may hold employees' contracts up to 3 months, which means that for 90 days you have no job security and may be fired at any moment without any consequence to the company, which my boss reminded everyone all the time, half joking, trying to keep everybody on their toes. He actually excused me from this treatment. He had this bad habit of treating the managers differently and gave me constant praise for a good job till the day my temp contract ended, meaning I was then an actual employee with full benefits and couldn't be fired without him paying me everything the law stated. So it really surprised me when he started the hostile treatment, not 24 hours after my temporary contract ended and the full employment began. Gone were the praises, and in their place came screams, bad reviews, and more insane demands. We paid an outside company to do maintenance on the classroom PCs every week, but somehow bugs and crashes were now my fault. One time, he made me stay after hours on a Saturday, after all students and staff had left, and prohibited me from going home before I had all computers running smoothly. He asked me to find him a new seller, and I introduced a friend, making it clear that by no means I was asking for him to be hired. I was just making introductions, and if he liked the guy after they talked, it was his own decision and responsibility to hire him or not. A few weeks later, he gave me an earful for going for drinks with this friend of mine, saying that managers should stick with managers and that I should mingle with him, not the staff, because they were beneath us, apparently. I said this was absurd, reminded him that I knew this guy for years already and that if he wanted to, he could join us for drinks anytime. It was not the response he expected. The abuse continued and actually intensified. One day, I started to feel chest pains and my left arm went completely numb. While my friend called for an ambulance, I retreated to my boss's office, at the time being occupied by his fiancée, and calmly told her, "Don't mind me. I think I'm having a heart attack, so I'll just lay here for a few minutes so the students can't see me." Of course, she went nuts after this. The good news, it wasn't a heart attack, but an anxiety attack, and wasn't the last one. I was 36 at the time, and it was the first time I saw my mom cry since my dad passed, more than 20 years prior, from, of course, a heart attack. I decided enough was enough, so I gave my 30 days notice, citing health issues. I hadn't yet completed 6 months working there. I sat down with my boss, did not blame him in any way, but said the stress was making me worry about leaving my family too soon, and gave him every guarantee he needed that I would work through my entire notice period in order to complete every single project we started since my hiring. So I finished updating the courses, finished the development of our brand new e-learning platform, finished hiring the teachers for the next semester. I even shoot videos to promote every single course on the school's menu. Less than a week left till my last day, he called me in his office to show the company's new career plans. I don't know the equivalent term in English, but it's the path planned by the company for the growth of each position. "So you see, that's what you're going to earn in a few months. That is, if you stop being a sissy and just do your effing job." I could not believe it. After all the abuse, all the toxicity, I had tried to go the higher road and end everything on a good note. And he called my health issues being a sissy. I was done. I told him to just deduce the next few days from my final payment and left. Now for the revenge. Remember how I introduced him to a friend and he actually hired the guy? On my final days, I announced my boss I would open my own school after leaving, but failed to mention that this other employee was my business partner. So when my friend asked himself for his 30 days notice, our boss went livid. He all but threw out my friend, telling him to never put his feet there again and leave immediately. According to the law, That means he had to pay for that whole month, plus every remaining day he worked before, plus commissions. Adding to that, my own last payment, which came with 6 months of benefits, he had more than enough to start our new venture. But that's not the revenge. He actually made us sign a sort of NDA with a bunch of illegal clauses, which made the whole contract invalid, preventing us from revealing any company secrets during or after our time with them, at the risk of being fined $30,000, around $6,000 at the time. However, no contract in the world may prevent one, at least in my country, from reporting any illegal activities. Which is why I did not worry one bit when I reported him and his school for having 50 plus PCs running on pirate versions of Windows, Office, the whole Adobe suite, Revit, Cinema 4D, 3ds Max, and lots of other very expensive software. Not long before this, a big and traditional chain of stores had gone bankrupt in our state for having to pay retroactively fines upon fines on Windows alone. So it's an understatement to say that the government was taking piracy pretty seriously at the time. It gets funnier when you realize that the reported person receives an email with the whole complaint, apart from the author of the report, the minute it is filed, so he can prepare his defense. His response wasn't at all unexpected. Some 5 minutes after our report, a similar email came into our inbox, reporting us for 30 unlicensed copies of Windows and many other programs. My business partner still talked to the finance manager on our old job and, knowing that our ex-boss would probably be right beside him fuming and screaming, decided to send him a picture of our only classroom, with no computer in sight. We decided to specialize in classes about comic book making, which dispensed computers, and whenever we would host a class that demanded it, we would ask our students to bring their own. A few weeks later, I heard that the whole remaining staff abandoned ship, leaving him with only an intern and a few teachers without permanent contracts. My former boss actually kept tabs on us and, learning that some of his teachers were contacting us to host special classes, started to blackmail them, threatening to terminate their contracts if they insisted on doing business with us, even though there was no exclusivity clause in their contracts. Some of them called on the bluff, and he had to pay another shitload of money on breach of contracts alone. Time went by, and I hear the guy is counting his pennies and struggling to keep afloat. He used to open full classes each 6 months, occupying every date and time available. Now, he hardly can fill a turn, started holding only night classes and not even every day. Half the week he closes his doors, not having enough students nor the money to pay employees on these days. Before I left, he had paid $40,000 on the architectural project alone to expand the business within a year. But now I hear he was considering closing his door and offering only online courses, even before the pandemic. And now for the part 2, where, years after my revenge, I made my ex-boss again pay a bunch load of money, this time on legal fees. First of all, I need to say that my own school has closed its doors. Me and my friend were not a good fit, as business partners at least, and now we're not even friends. That's life. We cashed out, sold what could be sold, and each went with our lives. I may eventually write about my petty revenge against this guy. You can say I hold many grudges. But this tale is not about him. Some months later, I found out our ex-boss was suing us, our school that is, which, as I mentioned, didn't even exist anymore. My ex-friend's sister, who is also his lawyer, contacted me and told me about it. I couldn't find anything on the public records since the lawsuit was running on court-ordered sigil. I talked to my own lawyer and she said, "If they didn't cite you directly, pretend you know nothing about the matter." And so I ignored the issue for a few years. During lockdown, the appointed official finally found me at home and served me. That also gave me access to my boss's claims, since I had 15 days to prepare my defense. My wife found me laughing out loud in front of the computer. His claims were absolutely ridiculous. He claimed I stole his courses and used as proof a print from our now offline site side by side with his own, saying something in the lines of, "It becomes obvious that both schools have the same courses." However, He presented no explanation of the similarities besides the names, which weren't even the same. We had a segment of trainings under the umbrella graphic design, but no class with that specific name, for example, and no other class on any of his main subjects. Also, most of our classes were in the topic of comic books, which he never worked with. He also called us cynical for daring to compete with him on the same market, even if it was my own previous experience on the learning sector that landed me the job on his firm in the first place. At one point, the document cited a statement from our site where we said that we took our previous experiences as a way to learn with our mistakes and do differently, and call it a confession of plagiarism. I asked my lawyer to let me write my own defense, leaving to her the task to translate it to lawyerism. She actually copied and pasted my full statement, saying she couldn't have argued better. I put on paper all the repulse I felt, cited all my experience with teaching, and rebuked every single one of his claims with facts and actual proofs, attaching printed conversations, saved emails, and bringing attention to his own lacking of proof. The judge tossed the case and made him pay all the legal fees, including my lawyer's. He could have avoided it if he had entered the lawsuit on small claims court, but since he wanted the $30,000 from the NDA plus damages and sigil, he had it coming. Just another shovel of dirt on his coffin. TLDR. My former boss calls me homophobic names for choosing my own health over the stress of working for him. So I reported him for software piracy and made him lose a fortune. Years later, he sued me, and I made him lose even more money in legal fees. Edit. I guess there are a few details I left out that I thought weren't important, but in the end could help to explain circumstances better. As many of you guessed, English is not my first language. That would be Portuguese. Even then, as a writer, I have to admit, not my best work. Later yesterday, I posted on r/petty revenge about my former business partner, and I think I was much more successful in conveying a cohesive narrative. But be warned, it's twice the length for a very, very small revenge on the end. About the homophobic slur, I guess the closest term, in English, for what the guy actually said would be faggot. But I really don't like that word, and I really thought sissy would be equivalent. Also, maybe it's important to note that I am queer. I'm AMAB, non-binary, and pan/bisexual. And this dude knew, at least about the second part, the first one even I hadn't figured out until much later. Early on my training, my boss started to rant about how he would never again hire women nor fags because they were all but trouble. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at me. "You're not a faggot, are you?" "Actually, I'm bisexual." "Okay, so not a fag." Whew. I swear I'm not making this up. About the NDA, I said, it was sorta an NDA. It was actually an abusive document that he demanded that I wrote stating lots of rules and penalties regarding employees' behavior, and made everybody sign. It wasn't written by a lawyer. Again, I wrote it, based on internet searches and notes he kept sending me by email. As I said, there were a bunch of illegal clauses that made it in fact void, but his objective was to bully workers into thinking it wasn't, and that defying him would result in dire consequences. Also, he never gave any one of us a copy, which, is all sorts of illegal as well. About my lawyer, she's actually my mother-in-law, and she's not very good at her job. But being family, she never charges me. So this lawsuit was a big win for her as well. Also, I consider myself a very educated person, and although my degree is in advertising, it never stopped me from wanting to know about other stuff. Speaking English, for example, is something I taught myself, although not that well, I know a lot about law and local regulations, and that knowledge has helped me before, like all the times I tried to start a new business. So no, not that surprisingly, I could write my own legal defense. Thank you everybody for the comments. Your revenge was masterfully executed. OP remained professional and exposed his or her toxic boss through legal and moral means. The reporting of software piracy was a brilliant move, hitting him where it hurt most financially. It was really a satisfying revenge. The next story is from As an atheist films. Try to stiff me? Get a mechanic's lien. Hello, per prorevenge. I will be using fake names for this story that happened to me about 7 years ago. The job. I was starting my side business doing IT work for businesses and had some successful jobs for a few companies. I found word of mouth was the best way to gain new clients because entrepreneurs tend to network with other business owners. Tony was one such client who had heard I had done some work for a client and called to see if I could help. His company's needs were to stop using a semi-accounting service that they had been paying a percentage of their profit to process payments, purchase orders, and billings/receivables. He brought in an accountant to work a new product, pretty well known. They wanted a server to be accessible remotely and had already paid their ISP for a static IP for the server, but needed the actual server, redundancy UPS, and firewall device. I explained that for the product they had, we could probably set up a workstation and not a server, and it would run approximately $3,500 total and would be easy. But no, the owner wanted a full-blown server system with all the bells and whistles. He explained that he would likely be using the server for a CRM and a few other systems later on. The setup. Overall, the entire cost for the system would be $8,000, not including a few other services that needed annual billing, VPN, remote service. Equipment cost was $7,500. My labor charge was $500. UPS was $1,500. Server was $3,800, and refurbed firewall, Cisco ASA, with programming by a third-party specialist was $1,800, and a spare rack was $400. I got my contract signed, put an order with my distributor, I have Net45 set up with them, and the firewall specialist, and got to work 1.5 weeks later when the firewall came in last. I finished the job on a single weekend and got everything up and going after a call to the ISP, whom did not like the firewall appliance I installed. For some reason, they had to tweak things on their end and finally allowed the traffic to go through once more. I confirmed function with the owner, whom verbally approved and was happy. The move. I sent my invoice promptly on Monday. Left it as in, they had 1 week to pay. When I saw no reply or payment, after 4 days, I messaged Tony and asked if they had received my invoice. To my surprise, he replied the server was not working and proceeded to call me and tell me that the whole thing was a total waste of money and I should have never done the job. I, of course, apologized and informed him I would be on the way to fix whatever the problem was. When I got there, they refused to let me in to see the server, claiming they had someone coming over to fix my mishaps. At that point, I informed them they still needed to pay for the equipment, and we could maybe discuss my labor after I figure out what's going on. Tony refused to let me in, and was pretty upset. The advice. At this time, I was pretty upset. 2.5 weeks had passed since I ordered my equipment and my distributor was needing to get paid within 45 days. I was getting very nervous and was thinking of taking it to small claims court until, talking with a friend, he informed me I could pull a mechanic's lien. I informed him this was for IT, and he stated that mechanic's lien where I live can actually be pulled on various industries, and IT was one of them. So I started the process to fill out and file a mechanic's lien on Tony's company. Much to my surprise, there was no court date. All I needed to do was provide considerable proof to clerks, and later to the constable. The revenge. After filling out the mechanic's lien and serving him notice, I once again gave him the opportunity to pay the $8,000 owed. By this time, I had spoken with my distributor and he switched my account from Net45 to Net90. He refused via phone call and got him on text. I took the information I had and went to the local constables, whom, after seeing the mechanic's lien and proof, set up an appointment to meet me at the place of business to take back my server, UPS and firewall. I went in on Tuesday, which I had learned was the day the accountant came in to start the week 0. Constable and I arrived at 7:30 a.m. right on opening time. At first, they refused entry until Tony came by and was informed I was enforcing my mechanic's lien and would be taking back my equipment. He immediately got riled up and claimed I could not take the equipment because a new person had replaced it all. The constable asked if I had serial numbers and models for the equipment, which I did. We go in and find my server, UPS, and firewall all in the exact same way I left it. The server showed it had been online for the entire time. No real changes were noticed, and as far as I could tell, no one had worked on it. Tony began to chuckle when I shut the server down and says, "How are you going to take the system when it's bolted to the ground? Bet you didn't think about that, did you?" He did not realize that rack-mounted equipment is not permanently attached to the mount. I guess he thought he had me beat because it was all one system that you cannot take apart, and not something that was put together. His jaw dropped the moment I removed the server, loaded it onto the cart after removing a couple of bolts. He started panicking and started telling the constable that he would sue him if he didn't stop me. The constable simply stayed calm and ignored the owner. I guess after a bit he informed Tony that he needed to get out of his face and step back. But when Tony refused to back down, the constable undid his holster's safety harness and put his hand on his firearm. Tony's face was exquisite, full of fear, and eventually a dawning sensation that this was going to happen one way or another. At first, I did not understand why he was so riled up and now had a panicked face like his world just collapsed until a bit later. I wrapped up my server, UPS, firewall, and left the rack. True to Tony's word, undoing the bolts proved difficult to impossible with the tools I had, so I told Tony he could keep IT for the new server he tries to set up. It didn't take more than 2 hours before I got a call from him stating that he had talked to his attorney and he would be suing me for damages and I would be going to jail for trespassing. I informed him he did not pay for the equipment. His equipment was repoed, thus there was nothing to sue for. As far as trespassing, I was servicing a mechanic's lien with a law enforcement officer. Thus, it is not trespassing. He then starts hemming and hawing about how he needs to bill clients because he hasn't had revenue in a week, but his accountant can't do anything because she has no access to the accounting software and they have no copies. I informed him it was not my problem. I would not be giving access to the server nor data contained, and he should have paid for the equipment instead of trying to screw me over for $8,000. He then offered to pay me if I could install the server back the same day, but that only if I did it that same day, otherwise he'd find someone else. I informed him that our original contract was null and void. I would be returning the equipment to my distributor, but first I had to wipe the storage by DoD standards, which means 0% chance of recovering files, unless he somehow had NSA-level funds. He starts freaking out and resorts back to what he usually did. Threatens me to lawsuit, make my life a living hell, etc. So I hang up and text him I am going to proceed to delete his data that evening and that I was no longer interested in working with him. More advice and the real revenge. He called me at least 50 times. I just silenced my phone and had a talk to my friend later that night. The friend whom had given me the advice. He then tells me why I was returning the equipment. If I had the only copy that has everything from client names, contacts, phone numbers, billings, receivables, etc. He asked me how much revenue did the company generate. I informed him I was taking a wild guess, but it was somewhere in the ballpark of $58,078 at $21 for the last month. He laughs and tells me, why don't you charge them double the price to get his equipment back and have him pay you cash before you start? He was right. I was taking my petty revenge and walking out with $1,800 in a firewall I had to pay in advance, and a $500 unpaid labor charge. Why not take it a step further, get sweeter revenge, and get paid a fat stack of money? The following day, I messaged Tony. I apologize for the way I behaved yesterday. It was not professional. Unfortunately, your short attitude and attempts to screw me over got the better of me. The server has not been wiped yet. I would like to reconsider a new arrangement so we can salvage this sour experience and turn it into sweet honey. Are you interested in working with me to get your equipment back? I must warn you, it will be extra since I would be doing double the work. Let me know. Tony immediately called me, and immediately his ways came up. I knew you would change your mind and come crawling back. Yes, I want everything back, but I am only paying $80-50 and not a dime more. The $50 is me being generous to give you a second chance to do things right. I immediately informed him that I still have all the equipment, and in fact, it would only take maybe 20 minutes to complete the job. However, I had a different idea in terms of the price. The new price was $15,000 to be paid cash. He immediately starts yelling and hollering. I keep talking and inform him he has 2 weeks to decide if being able to get paid by his clients was worth it. If not, the equipment was going back, and that would be that. No hard feelings. I hang up. About 2 days later, I get a call from Tony informing me he agreed to new arrangement to please set it up and install it ASAP. I tell him I can go Friday, but I would need to be paid $15,000 cash before I even unload a single bolt from my vehicle. He agreed. I could hear a lady talking, tell him he needs to get this resolved because they had not had revenue in nearly 2 weeks. This was on Wednesday. On Thursday, I get a call from his daughter, whom is apparently the accountant and the lady whom was telling him to resolve it. She is cutting a check and needs to know my name. I inform her I would not be accepting checks, and I had told Tony specifically it would be in cash. She says okay and tells me if the amount of $12,000 was correct. I once again correct her and inform her the correct amount was $15,000 cash. She said in satire, "Of course it's $15,000. I will go make the withdrawal and have the money ready tomorrow." Sure enough, Friday morning, true to her words, she and Tony were there with $15,000 cash. I counted it in front of her and Tony. She makes a comment saying that I was a lifesaver because they could not go back to the service they used before to get paid, and they urgently needed to get some POs sent out. I placed it in my vehicle, locked the glove box, and unloaded the equipment. True to my word, it took me 20 minutes to place the server, firewall, and UPS inside the rack mount. Connect the cables, power on the server, and ask them to test it out when they get a chance. If anything was wrong, to not contact me and to have a good day. I actually had tested it out already before I left their server room. Despite my pettiness at times, I am still a professional. The revenge was really exemplary, a smart and calculated win. The best move was to hold client's vital data hostage and to make him pay $15,000. The revenge was perfectly executed and satisfying. The last story for this video is from Don't Be Mean, or I'll Sue. Narcissist boss and complicit company get what they deserve. A bit of background. A few years ago, I quit my career in the tech industry. This was after the company I was working for went public and everything went downhill. I was sick of making money for the rich and needed some time to really live life. I proceeded to spend a few months traveling, working on home projects, and really doing whatever the hell I wanted. One day, about 4 months into my freedom, I was having lunch with my best friend, and she told me, "You need to stop being lazy and get a job." She had recently been hired at a company in the construction industry and mentioned there was an opening. The opening was doing something I had zero experience in, but a change of career was appealing. I applied and promptly was given a phone interview. I spent a little time researching everything about this position, and after many interviews, managed to fake my way in. Turns out this position was wildly different from anything I had done before. It taxed me in ways I had never experienced. Not only was my job stressful, my boss turned into a nightmare. He had worked there since the company was founded. He was a part of the good old boys club. Now, for everyone that doesn't know, the construction industry has virtually zero HR. This was close to $1 billion company and was still the same way. My boss was a narcissist, sexist, liar, and downright jerk. Weirdly, most of that was directed towards others, and not me. My best friend was one person that took the brunt of it. It killed me to hear what he would say to her. All of this took its toll on me. New Year's Day. About 3 months into my employment, January 1st hit. I wake up at 2 a.m. in the morning with pain in my chest and my head racing 1,000,000 miles an hour. Luckily, my roommate was a paramedic and happened to be home. I rush over to her room and yell that I think I'm having a heart attack. She comes out, takes my vitals, asks some questions, and determines I am most likely having a panic attack. Sure enough, I calmed down and managed to not die. I had never had a panic attack up until then. Throughout the following week, I continued to have flare-ups of chest pain and heart palpitations. I figure something could really be wrong, so I go to my doctor. He does a few tests and determines it's most likely some acid reflux. He prescribes some meds, and the following week is better. Then, one night, when heading home from dinner with my sister, boom, I get rear-ended at a stoplight by a drunk driver. No skid marks. Didn't even attempt to stop. I felt a bit of tightness in my back, so decide to go get checked out at the hospital to be safe. I get there and they take my vitals. My blood pressure was on the moon, like 180 to 100. They take it about an hour later and it's still high. They recommend I go see my doctor again. The next couple weeks waiting for my doctor appointment is hell. I am having daily panic attacks, chest pain, trouble breathing, massive fatigue. The whole gambit. Finally get to the day of my appointment. Let my doctor know what's going on, and he determines I should go see a few different specialists and get all kinds of tests done to be safe. Throughout the next couple months, and have everything poked and prodded. Because of the amount of tests that needed to be done, I missed a good bit of work. This turned my boss on me. He constantly complained about me being gone. All the while, not an ounce of work was dropped. With my tech background, I also took it upon myself to start making reports and collecting data that I would present to him on ways of improving the department and company. I later found out he would take these reports, which at times could save the company hundreds of thousands to potentially millions of dollars, and present them as his own to the owner. This made me furious and didn't help with my physical issues. However, slowly I made it through all of the prescribed tests and they couldn't find anything physically wrong with me. Turns out, all of the issues were caused by stress and anxiety, something I had never had an issue with before. My doctor referred me to an amazing counselor that helped me learn how to manage the problems I was facing and get back to a reasonable state of mind. Although this never got to an acceptable level because of my boss. I started to email HR with my issues with him and things I have witnessed with others. Most of this was met with unwillingness to help in any way. Q. The turning point. A dear co-worker whom everyone loved and respected decided to quit out of nowhere. She too worked under my boss. In her exit interview, she gave the sole reason for quitting as my boss. She finally hit her breaking point, and enough was enough. However, because she was so well liked, this prompted some questions from the owner and other senior management. They wanted to know why my boss was the reason for her leaving. They had HR set up a meeting with us in the department and our boss to go over our issues with him. We all were excited to finally, hopefully, get the people that matter to listen. We have the meeting and we all lay out the issues with our boss and give a multitude of examples. I went a bit overboard and had an entire presentation. Turns out this was all a charade to cover my boss's ass. He was prescribed some management counselling, which I'm pretty sure he never did, and things continued on the merry way. However, now, with the knowledge my boss had of our issues with him, he turned the volume up to 11. The constant berating, yelling, write-ups came flowing out. It got bad enough that I started to secretly record every meeting with him. I saved every single email and documented every interaction with him. I continued to push for help from HR, but again, his status in the company kept him immune from any response. Thankfully, throughout all of this, I managed to keep my mental health in check thanks to my counselor's tools. I, once again, get sick. Yes, I get sick, but this time it's with a real cold and lasts a few days, all of which covered by government-mandated sick time. I come back to work and not even a week goes by and I get called into my boss's office with other senior management. I knew this wasn't good. My boss lets me know that they are firing me for attendance. I am gobsmacked. I have never been fired in my life, and I know I was an asset to the company's success. I didn't slack off. I didn't miss deadlines. The attendance excuse appeared to just be what my boss thought would be easiest to get rid of me with. Now, I live in an at-will state. You can be fired for basically any reason except for a bad one. They presented me with a meager 2-week pay severance. I declined signing it, packed my stuff up, and left. I knew the whole situation didn't feel right, especially because I was familiar with the recent state laws that passed about sick time and an employer not being legally allowed to fire you for using it. Because of this, I went to my mom, who has been in the law field her entire life, and got a referral for an employment law attorney. Things start to look up. The day of my appointment with the employment law attorney couldn't come quick enough. I had gathered everything I had collected from my time at the company and presented it to him. The recordings on my phone, the emails, the documented interactions, everything. After showing the attorney, he pushes back from his desk and says, "Holy shit, you have a hell of a case here. They messed up bad." A wave of relief flows over my entire body. Me thinking the only blatant violation was firing me for using sick time, I was taken aback when he proceeded to explain that the company made 4 huge violations. The sick time violation not even being anywhere near the top of the list. Some big things I learned from him. The meeting I had with my boss, HR, and the rest of the department where we went over all of our issues with him was a key piece of evidence for one of their biggest violations. I learned this type of meeting is considered protected concerted activity and covered under the National Labour Relations Act. The Act protects against retaliation for having this kind of meeting. According to my lawyer, all of my boss's activities following that meeting can be considered retaliation. When it comes to health issues and how they affect you at your workplace, make sure you document every interaction with your employer. It's important to show that you made an effort to let them know of your complications and how they may affect you at your workplace. I sent countless emails to HR, letting them know of my mental health issues, and their failure to make accommodations was a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. Having recordings and documentation on how your employer interacts differently with females and males is important to prove a violation of the Civil Rights Act. After all of this, the lawyer stated I had 3 options. Option 1, I could retain him and we could file a lawsuit. He explained that would be expensive and take a lot of time. However, would most likely result in a good amount of money. Option 2, I could file claims with all of the departments that cover the violated acts. He explained that some of these departments can take years to investigate and process the claims. However, for some of them, especially the violation of the National Labour and Relations Act, the investigation can be absolute hell on the employer. This would probably be the biggest FU to the employer. Option 3, I go back by myself and renegotiate the severance. This being the quickest and easiest option. This option sounded very appealing. I really didn't want to drag this out for multiple years. I told the lawyer that option 3 is most likely my choice, and he mentioned that I should probably start negotiations at 9 months of severance and full benefits. After consulting with people close to me, I decided to go with option 3. I met with HR and senior management, explained that I consulted with an employment law attorney, stated all of the acts that he feels they violated, and asked for 9 months of severance. After a couple weeks negotiating with their attorney, we settled on 6 months of severance with full benefits. It's been a few years since this has happened, and it still makes me feel overwhelmingly happy thinking about it. In the end, I found an absolutely amazing job in the same industry. My ex-boss ended up being moved to a position that wasn't in management, and hopefully, nobody will ever have to go through what I and others went through at that company again. TLDR. Boss is the devil. Miss work because of mental health issues. Boss continues to be a douche lord. Start to document every interaction with boss. Get fired. Consult lawyer. Make the company pay me 6 months of severance with benefits, and my boss is no longer in management. The revenge was strategic and deeply satisfying, a smart and calculated move that delivered justice in the most exemplary way possible. OP meticulously documenting every injustice and building an ironclad case and getting the toxic boss kicked out of management was really cool. Perfect revenge, really.